Hello, I'm Kent O'Kelly. Here's the story of the restoration of my Tripacer. It took me 3.5 years, and I did about 95% of the work with supervision from my A&P IA as required by FAA rules. This story is mostly aimed at first-timers. You who have done it know already how to do it, but you might enjoy seeing how I did it anyway. Here goes. I used to tell people that worked for me that they should set the expectations for a presentation before they gave it. Here are the expectations. I've worked on airplanes off and on for many years, but I've restored exactly one myself, and I helped restore another. So you'll see things that I could have done better and faster. But you also should see that if you haven't ever done this, that you can do it. You'll make mistakes just as I did, but you can do it. I gave this presentation to our local EAA chapter, who mostly build things. I asked them a question. Is it easier to build something or restore it? Then I asked for a show of hands. Many thought it was easier to restore than build. Well, of course they did. Most of them are builders. But building isn't easy either. Okay, is it easier to build or is it easier to restore? Well, how about this? It's a P-47 down at a Colorado Springs museum that they plan to restore to flying status. Think restoring is easy? Well, are they really going to restore this thing? Sorta. They said they'd use about 10% of it. So what's the answer? Well, there really isn't one. Most of us need a sort of a push to start a project. And I got part of my push to restore the Tripacer when I received the award shown in the picture. Good friends Bill Kendrick and Jim Gardner of Oklahoma gave me what they called the Utilitarian Award. Now, utilitarian was the nicest word that Bill could think of for ugly. The award's features? You can see them. A garbage truck and a Japanese 0. All right, let's get started. But, of course, you don't start until you tear things apart. You don't start restoring, that is, until you tear things apart. You have to get ready. Here's a friend of mine who built a wing support stand for me. I published the design in the Short Wing Piper News some years ago. It's a simple A-frame support that has wheels so that it can be rolled out of the way. And in the right side of the slide, you see that you need something to hold the wing up while you disconnect the struts. 2 pieces of 2x4 do the trick. Well, with the wings stowed, I built a rather crude rotation fixture that I used for both the wings and the fuselage. I made what I called a medieval gear out of plywood that would hold the wing or fuselage in the position I wanted. I started with a sheet of 1/2 inch chipboard, you know, the kind of plywood that's used on roofs and walls of houses. It was somewhat flimsy, but it worked. If I had it to do again, I'd use 3/4 inch plywood. I laid out the arcs for the circle, cut eight arc pieces of the chipboard on my bandsaw, then screwed them together with drywall screws. By offsetting each circle 45 degrees with respect to the other, plus some spacers, the resulting hoop held together and was 1.5 inches thick. I built a support for the ring, which would allow it to be rotated. I made the support too small the first time, Ralph Katowski, who restored his award-winning Tripacer before I did mine, sent me some comments. I made it bigger, and it worked. The lesson? Don't ever hesitate to ask somebody who knows more than you. The sport was pretty simple. Some plywood, garage door rollers, and a few clamps to hold things in place. Finally, what this presentation is all about, the restoration. But wait, as I said earlier, we have to tear everything down before we can restore anything. Now starting hurts some. You know, that first cut, do I really want to do this? Well, you do, and then it gets easier. It used to look like an airplane. Guess it sort of does. Stripped down to the frame. The good news? Little or no rust, even after 50 plus years. Fortunately, the airplane lived much of its life in the dry western United States. We all want to get to recovering, painting, and finishing the airplane, but not so fast. Restoring an airplane is mostly about getting ready, and there's a lot of getting ready to do. In the left-hand picture, you can see a piece of plastic hanging down on the far side of the fuselage. Know what it's for? Yeah, I thought you did. You're spraying sand and it's going to go somewhere. The sand might as well drop down below or by the fuselage. You sweep it up, sift it through a window screen, and use it again. In the right-hand picture, how about propping up the tail while you work? A garbage can and a 5-gallon bucket plus a couple other things make the stand work just fine. Are you getting the idea that restoring an airplane doesn't have to be high-tech? You'll likely do a lot of sandblasting. What do you need? Not much that's fancy. Just take your time, remove what you need to remove, but remove as little good steel as possible. You need a broom? Well, of course, you got to clean up and maybe reuse the sand. Okay, the fuselage is sandblasted, clean, and ready to prime. You'll need a paint booth, but not yet. We're ready to get on with the real restoration, or are we? Nope, not yet. I think that the majority of the restoration time is spent rubbing on things, scraping, cleaning, sanding, brushing 50 years or so of schmutz off of the parts. The left-hand picture shows the dirty firewall still on the fuselage. I cleaned it, then had it zinc coated. Same firewall, but looks like new. And of course the holes are all in the right places. Here's the aileron angle limiting horn. It needed work, just like almost anything that's steel on the airplane will need some work. But after sandblasting and refinishing, the part was just fine. Unless you buy new metal parts, you'll make lots of them. A good thought. Never throw anything away. Everything's a pattern, including the fabric you took off the airplane when you started. The fabric will show you where the holes are. Here's the landing gear. More to strip and paint, and it has on it a wheel fairing attachment that I designed, did a stress analysis for, and got a 337 approved by the FAA. We all know that the propeller slipstream beats up on the lower wing near the fuselage. I suspect that most of us have lost a fair number of inspection plates this way. I decided to end the reign of inspection plates by putting metal plates under the wing fabric in these locations. You can see the plates in the picture. I riveted them in place and haven't had an inspection plate depart in the 5 years since I finished the restoration. A thought. Don't hurry to do the exterior. You'll want to work on the interior while it's accessible. You need a sink in your shop? Well, of course not. It's not absolutely necessary, but it sure helps. The airplane had made many lousy landings. I likely made most of them, or certainly a lot of them. And the landing gear attach bolts were bent. Sure did trash the main landing gear getting it off. But I cleaned it up, made new trailing edges, primed it, painted it, recovered it. Looks great. Along with the obvious necessary tools like clecos and such, here are some of my favorites. Spade bits. The bit that's used to drill holes in 2x4s to pull electrical wiring through and such. Really? Well, it turns out that the points on the bit don't crack plexiglass. You just need a hole a little larger than the bolt or screw you use. The pointy end of the spade bit works just fine. How about a Forstner wood bit? Sure. It's great for drilling holes in 2024 T3 aluminum. A Dremel tool cuts aluminum and plexiglass really well. As I said earlier, you'll make or buy a lot of metal parts, even on a so-called fabric airplane. Here's the access panel on the bottom of the fuselage. On the left, a bad idea. A sheet of steel on a sheet of aluminum. Galvanic corrosion. As you can see in the picture, yeah, it happens. On the right, a better idea. Aluminum on aluminum. When you make parts, you'll drill a lot of holes in them. You'll only hold onto a piece of aluminum while you drill a hole in it once. Bits grab. Hold onto it with something besides your fingers. And as I said earlier, old parts equal patterns. And the tool from Harbor Freight and other suppliers that shears, bends, and rolls metal is really handy. I used it a lot. We say that we fly fabric airplanes, and that's true. But there's a lot, did I say a lot, of metal on our airplanes. Here it is in the two pictures. I made most of the parts that didn't have compound curves, where the metal bends in 2 or more directions. There's a vinyl liner on the inside of the Firewall. I bought a new one. It was black, wrong color, so I painted it with Stewart Systems waterborne or water-based, they call it both, people call it both, paint. Just like everywhere else, it adhered just fine to the vinyl. You have a plexiglass landing light lens that's pitted and maybe yellowed by now. So why not make a new one? Use the old one as a pattern and make a mold. It's on the left in the upper left-hand picture. Then make a trowel piece. You sneak it into your spouse's oven, heat it until you can bend it around the mold, and then you bend it. Turn out good? Yeah, it did. Okay, make the real one. It's quite easy. There's insulation in the doors and overhead area above the cabin. I bought water heater insulation at Home Depot. But be careful though. You have to prove that it's not flammable. To do this, light a piece of it with a match. It'll light and burn until you take the match away. Then the flame should go out. If it does, then it's not flammable. Well, you get to pick the finish paint, colors, and whatever, and there are many good finishing products. I would never, ever even think about using dope, but some people do. I use Stewart Systems. It has no methyl ethyl ketone in it, and I would never, ever even think about using anything but the water-based, waterborne products. Well, finally, here's the fuselage hanging on the rotation fixture in my shop. We're ready to cover things. So in covering, as you know, the Dacron goes on rather baggy. But the family iron makes it right. The rotation fixture in the picture isn't a requirement, but it helps a lot. The wing's not much different. I did put white felt on the leading edge under the fabric. Made things smoother. I liked it. And I also built the small tent-shaped fairing in the lower left-hand picture over the aileron cable. Sometimes you really do need a paint booth, but not always. Primer doesn't care too much about dust. But here's where you do need a paint booth. This one's made of 3/4 inch PVC pipe and 4mm plastic sheeting that we often call Visqueen. When you put things together, the PVC together, the pipe, don't glue it. The joints will hold just fine without glue. Then you can take them apart, store them for future use, give them to a friend, or whatever. Use masking tape to hold the plastic sheets together. You can then reuse the plastic sheets again if you so choose. Parts, including a wing or fuselage, are painted in one session using the waterborne paint. Paint a fogging or misting coat, wait 5 minutes, turn up the paint flow on the gun, spray it again. You test it for tackiness. You want it to be tacky before the next coat. Not dry, but tacky. So you test it with a finger. When the paint's no longer wet, spray it again. On the 4th coat, magic happens. The paint flows out and glosses. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour to do a wing. The white smears on top of the fuselage in the picture? My shop ceiling light reflections. Daggone, that looks good. Dressing up the metal instrument panel makes it look really good. I used the same paint for the panel that I used everywhere else. Worked just fine. As I said earlier, sometimes you screw up. You won't make a lot of mistakes if you've restored a few airplanes. If this is your first, expect a lot of mistakes. I sure made a lot. Here's one. I ran out of primer, so I called Stewart Systems and asked if I could use automotive primer to finish a part of the job. They said, sure. But I didn't wait a long time before I shot the top coat. These primers have volatile organic compounds and they outgas for a long time. This is what can happen if you don't wait. You get to do it over. Use your own expletive to describe the difficulty of installing a headliner. I found it really difficult and certainly used a lot of expletives, likely some I didn't even remember I knew. Hardest thing I tried to do in restoring the airplane. But it did turn out well, and so the expletives really weren't needed. There's lots of work to do on the interior. The picture shows the rear door, but I also cleaned up and primed the seat frames. I shaped the seat foam that I obtained from Airtex using my bandsaw with a metal cutting blade. That was the best thing I found to cut foam. I tried an electric carving knife, but it didn't work at all for me. I had an automotive seat covering company on the airfield do the seat and door covers. They even understood aircraft paperwork. Okay, here the fuselage is painted in my shop and the landing gear fits, and it has new bolts. Good idea to use new bolts anywhere there's significant structural loads, of course. Took the gear back off to move the fuselage out of the shop. You'll want to chrome plate a lot of steel parts. A local bumper shop can do the job. Putting the metal parts you make together can take a lot, did I say a lot, of fitting, filing, pulling and pushing, and some more expletives. Here's the front end aluminum coming together. You can see, of course, that I didn't try to rebuild the nose bowl or the chin underneath the engine. These are the parts with compound curves. Okay, the old joke, can you get it out of the basement? Of course. The door to my shop was 1 inch wider than the fuselage, giving me a ½ inch, roughly, on each side. I got it in, so I should be able to get it out. Quite a procedure to get it out, but I did. I borrowed a good neighbor's trailer to take the airplane to the airport. And while I was at it, I might as well have borrowed his truck as well, which I did. Hope you have a neighbor as good as mine. That's grandson Garrett helping load it and tie it down on the trailer. I painted the trim at the hangar. If you want to put swishy stripes on it, as I did, you'll need a large French curve. I used a piece of rubber or plastic door stripping, the kind that's on your front door, perhaps. When it was taped where I thought I wanted it, I traced its outline with a pencil, masked the airplane with clear plastic, then painted the trim. Hey, we're almost finished. It's all coming together. 2 of my friends, both A&Ps and one with an IA certificate, are in the picture putting things together. Jim Edwards, my flight instructor with the IA certificate, the owner of the hangar, made the first flight for me. My bride was relieved. Finished. Flying near Ogden, Utah, at our convention there. The restored airplane went from utilitarian to a prize winner. But you know, airplanes are never finished. We all continue work on them, trying to improve them as long as we have them. Oh, the early question, easier to build than restore? I really don't know. Restoration wasn't easy, but it was satisfying when it was finished. Finally, a few of the suppliers I used. I know that you recognize many of them. Thanks for listening. Take care.